Hi, friends. Welcome. Welcome to session two of this session on ease, joy, and purpose. Last night, we met and we talked a little bit about what colleges are looking for. What can you do this summer to sort of, get yourself on the, I'm not going to say the right track, but on the track to, either a productive summer or a meaningful summer, I should say. And my guests last night were Tom and Morgan. Today, and so I should say tonight, I have Andy with me. Andy, will you just take a minute to introduce yourself and give whatever context you want to give for this session, and then
Sure.
I'll go into the bullet points of what we're doing.
Cool. Yeah. I am CEG's editorial director. So a lot of both writing and then overseeing a lot of writing. And I've been writing and or working with students about this stuff for, it feels a little nebulous at this point. It's been long enough, like 15 years, something like that. Yeah. And I think it, in part as it relates to what we'll talk about a little bit, or at least how I think about how some of this relates, that I think my favorite part of both this work and the entire application process is actually getting students to think about what they value, why they value it, how they want to live their lives, why they actually want to live their lives the way they do. It feels like it's some of the most useful stuff we can ever be asked to explore, but sadly, we're not necessarily often asked to explore it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. Andy and I have also known each other for about 20 years or so, and been working together for almost as long. So today we're going to talk about happiness a little bit. We're going to talk about what makes life worth living. I know that sounds big and lofty, but Andy and I both spent a lot of time thinking about it. And so we're going to share some research, and Andy's even more of a science guy than I am. So, and he reads more than I do. So he's going to take over that part. And I'm going to be talking about, and actually we're going to do an exercise on finding your why. And this is an exercise that I think can be useful for students, parents, and also for counselors. I know we've got some counselors on the session tonight. And there's a little poll that just popped up. If you've got a second, let us know who you are. And so far we've got like 75% parents, but I'm curious to hear who else is here. I'm going to walk you through a little exercise that I've used in the past that I invented maybe 15 years ago. And then I was going through preparing this week for this session, and I was like, oh, this has been invented by someone else somewhere else, which Andy and I were talking on Slack today. That often happens, right? Where things get invented in different places around the same time. I'm going to share 5 different productivity tips for ways that I like to kind of revisit these every year right around this time, including a great to-do list that I use and I've been using for about 10 years. Then we're going to talk about savoring life. How do we get better at savoring life? We've got some like practical suggestions, and then we're going to do a little sneak peek into some cool things that we're doing at CEG this year. And yeah, we're excited you're here. We'll hopefully have time for some Q&A. So hi and welcome. So I'm going to just kick it over to you, Andy, for a few minutes and just offer you the prompt. What is happiness and what makes life worth living? And you're going to get Andy joked, he's like, in 5 to 7 minutes, right? I'm like, yeah. So kick us off here. What have you learned and what can you share?
So I think in a way, we're really lucky in that we live in a time in which there are people doing actual research on how does this work, that we don't have to rely on like, well, it feels like it's this. I think what I'll talk about in some ways, a lot of the research looks at that happiness itself is maybe a tricky and messy word, and we mean a lot of different things by it. And for some context, especially for the students who are here, but also the parents of the students, why I think this is useful to explore. I used to, a few years ago, I was teaching college critical thinking classes in LA, and I used to use the concept, Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia, which I'll paste this into the chat, and I'll Ashley's going to email a bunch of stuff with different links for things, so don't worry about catching some of those. But Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia, as far as something like, can be translated as happiness, but more about a complex depth of well-being, because happiness seems fairly simple at times. let me know if it's too quiet. Maybe I'll just lean way in. And so somebody whose work I like on this, who kind of gets specific, is there's a psychologist named Martin Seligman, who breaks it down into the idea of 3 different kinds of lives, but in terms of more like a pleasant life. And often when we think about happiness, maybe that's what initially we think of, like just positive feelings of like ebullience, smiley times. But a lot of the research shows that actually has pretty minimal impact on our lived experience and reportings of something like happiness and life satisfaction. The engaged life, as in, if any of you have read Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, like States of Flow, how often a sense of time stops for you, in which you just feel fully absorbed in what you're doing. And then especially something like a meaningful life, the creation of meaning. And to my mind, I think that there's something really useful. I think I have a bunch of different things with this, but I think in our society, we often use, in my opinion, the slightly wrong words, especially verbs, with things in ways that end up framing it in a way that makes it more difficult for us to understand or live or pursue as individuals and collectively. By that, for example, what I mean is that we often talk about something like finding a sense of meaning or purpose. And I think that's the wrong verb. I think it's really useful, both because I think that meaning isn't something that's waiting out there for me. And I might even, because it's so commonly used, I'll probably use a phrase like finding meaning at some point. But what I mean there is creating meaning, that I think that it's way more useful. And this plays into how I like to think about college applications in addition to everything else, is that I think meaning is the thing that you find ways to create in your life with how you engage with the world. That thinking that I'm going to find it, to my mind, finding meaning or purpose, I think just isn't accurate in terms of if we're thinking of it as like, oh, it's waiting out there for me. And if only I could find it. I think that that actually is a nice way to lead to suffering to some degree. If I feel like, oh, somebody like hid something out there for me, and if only I could find it in this giant maze of existence, feels like a way to torture myself a little bit. Whereas if it's something where it's like, no, meaning is something I get to create, that in the ways that I choose to interact with the world, how I engage, especially in relationships, that I create a sense of meaning and purpose. As far as what we mean by meaning, or another phrase that I heard recently that somebody used was the idea of realizing meaning, and realizing in a sense, not of just understanding, but of bringing into effect. Yeah. And that it's a combination of how we understand our life, yeah, and a sense of how that connects to goals that we have, and something like a sense of significance. Yeah, a sense that our life has inherent value and is worth living. And to that last part, I think this is something that's really hard, but I think there's something really useful, and it's something that I talk about with every student that I work with and in every workshop that I lead, but I think it's useful to notice that, to my mind at least, our culture does some hard things to us as far as sense of self and value and feeling that I have inherent worth. That I think we can undo. I got super lucky, to my mind, when I was about 25. I was lying on a couch reading Walt Whitman, trying to figure out what I wanted in the world. And in Leaves of Grass, there's this line. And it's, I exist as I am. That is enough. If no other in the world be aware, I sit content. And if each and all be aware, I sit content. One world is aware, and by far the largest to me, and that is myself. And whether I come to my own today, or in 10,000 or 10 million years, I can cheerfully take it now. With equal cheerfulness, I can wait. And I had a lucky, to my mind, moment of realizing like, oh, that's true. Like, it doesn't actually matter Like, what do people think about me matters in certain ways, but as far as their opinions on my sense of value or worth, that's an inherent thing. And it's hard to actually feel it at times, but understanding like, oh, that thing is true regardless of how often I feel that thing. Because, and this is something I used to get into in those classes I taught, it's that in a way, it's really hard work, but it's really simple, is in the sense of non-complex to my mind, to notice that we live in a society that programs us through millions and millions of messages over the courses of our lives, in essence telling us like, you're not quite okay the way you are. But if you bought this thing, or if you looked this way, or if you had this stuff, you might be. And to my mind, it's got to be extremely hard to literally have millions of messages. I forget the number, but by the time somebody's 18, they've literally seen like several million advertisements. And the core of those tends to be about a lack. Yeah, drives advertising in particular. Like, you're not quite okay, but if you had this thing, maybe you would be. I think that is words I won't use in polite company, but like I think that we need to destroy that as much as possible. That there are all kinds of things like, but again, I think that is tough. It takes time to dismantle it. Like, I used to ask classes, you know, because I would tell them like, look, you're good, you're enough, you are good as you are. And then I would ask them, how often have you heard that? I would love to actually hear in the chat box, like, how often have you all actually had somebody tell you like, no, you're good, you're enough as you are? To my mind, sadly, it was like frequently students would say like, never. No one has ever actually said that to me. And I think that there's something about understanding that can help be a basis for understanding how meaning functions and for building a sense of happiness and creating it for myself. Because as far as creating ways of creating meaning goes, it's that all of those messages tend to kind of give us the wrong message as far as building a meaningful and engaged and happy life. That those things, the research shows those things rarely, if ever, lead to anything like lasting happiness. That the things that do and the ways to create meaning are things like fostering curiosity and pursuing your values. Yeah, thinking about, oh, this is what I value. Here are the ways that I can bring those into my life or enact those further. A huge one, and there's a big Harvard study on this, but a huge one is about social relationships. Yeah, and everything from like romantic relationships to your engagement with a barista, but a sense of relationships with other human beings is how we can create more meaning in our lives. Creating a sense of belonging, yeah, in ways that we have a sense of like, oh, I am part of this bigger thing, yeah. Mindfulness practices, yeah, ways to understand, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but ways to understand my mood, understand how my mind works. Part of what I think is the most valuable about writing itself is that it's a way to practice reflection and metacognition, to understand here is how my mind works, here's what I think, what I love. Because I think that linked to those things, and this is a complex thing, and there's way more subtlety than we can get into probably in just a couple of minutes, but that I think it's useful to notice that college is fantastically useful as far as things like career goals, etc. But I think that it's, to my opinion, problematic or dangerous if you think of it as only that, especially because going back to the messages our society sends us, one really frequent one is that I ought to be finding meaning in work. And to my mind, if you're finding meaning in work, awesome, like great. But I'm wary of telling people that they ought to be. Because I think that what we should tell them and what we should help people with is figure out ways to create meaning everywhere else in your life. So that if you're finding meaning in work, cool. Because in my ideal world, that's what we have. But for us to live truly like happy, meaningful lives, and again, going back to Seligman, it's that the engagement and especially meaning are generally the biggest factors in terms of if people feel as though their lives are happy, that they have life satisfaction. Creating that sense of meaning outside of that, in particular in ways that we can, and I'll send a link to this, but one thing, going back to Ethan's, like, people think of the same things at the same times or sometimes later. I'm guaranteed I'm not the first to think this, and I know Adam Grant has talked about it before, but the idea of like, I think don't pursue your passion. I think that phrase is a mistake in some ways. I think pursue your values, because passions change. Anybody on this call have a passion that they were way into for several years, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I'm not so much into that thing anymore. I definitely am in that boat with lots of different things. Yeah. That passions are great, but I think something that leads to longer term meaning and satisfaction is the pursuit of values in our lives. And I could keep going for a long time, but I think I'll probably pause there as far as how I think we can understand research about happiness and create it. I'll kick it back to you, Ian.
Thanks. I want to do some meaning creation together. So I want to turn this into a practical exercise. And I want to invite you to do this. And you can pull out a piece of paper and pen if you like, or you can type. Or if you're on mute, you can just talk. I mean, I find that it's, I don't know, I'm in different moods and different times. So I'm going to offer a few prompts. And I want us to deconstruct a few of these things that I think sometimes pop into our heads when we're thinking about the future. So let me give you an example. One of the things that I hear students say is, I want to make money. And I'm like, well, great. But why? Like, what does money mean to you? So I want to invite us to finish this sentence. So I'm going to offer this sentence stem. The best thing about money is, and fill in the blank. And I welcome you to type this in the chat. What's the best thing about money? I'm seeing some folks talk about freedom, not having to worry about the basics. So I'm hearing like stability, certainty. I'm see opportunity, options, exploration, choices. I'm going to put into the chat, I mentioned the values exercise yesterday. I'm also going to screen share because I want to see what other ideas occur to us as I share a menu of more options. What else does money bring into your life? What other values are you noticing here? Someone notes security, flexibility, travel, independence. I'm noticing second chances, meaningful work. Next question. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. Next question, and I'm going to offer a series of these sentence stems. The main thing I want from a career is blank. The main thing I want from a career is blank. How would you finish that sentence? I'm going to screen share again with that same list. See if this offers any more ideas. I see challenge, social change, growth, making a difference, boundaries, making the world a little better than it was. Some that I'm going to add to that personally, beauty. I think recognizing, and in some cases creating beauty. I think of that as relation to my work. I think listening, I think feeling heard and helping others feel heard is an important part of what I want out of my working life, my career. I too would list social change. And I would list variety as well. Okay. I'm going to offer one more. We could do this with obviously lots of different spheres, but I'm choosing from a few options here. I'll share with you this. There's a resource that I'm drawing this from that I'll share you a link to. Ooh, this is okay. This is a harder one. This isn't the one I expected to pick. That's why I took a second, because I'm picking a new one. All right. Growth and learning are important to me because why are growth and learning are now there's an assumption there that growth and learning are important to you. I know, big assumption. Growth and learning are important to me because I'm going to do the same thing. See if more ideas occur to you, taking a look here. Someone says that's life. Variety. They keep my brain young. Discovery, stimulation, improvement. Joy. I'm also noticing for myself community. They help me feel more connected to others. The place I'm sharing these from, there's a positivepsychology.com has got a really neat toolkit that we'll share a link out to that's got these sentence stems. But essentially what I'm doing with everybody right now is I'm playing a game that we play with students a lot. It's called the So What game. And one of the things we're big fans of is insight. And insight to me is that moment when I'm reading a thing and there's something that I haven't thought of or haven't thought of in a particular way or haven't read in that particular phrasing. And so it sparks this moment of like, this little mini sort of aha moment. There's a little chart that I have for this. Actually, I may share it later. I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but it's a little chart on like, what is insight? But essentially, I think it comes from making connections that we weren't immediately apparent to us, but when we sort of see it, we go, there's something there that took a little mental leap and it lit up something for me. This is also possible. I think it's possible with questions like this, but another fun one to ask around this is there's this other exercise that's sometimes called the, no boundaries or the beyond limitations technique. And this is sort of relevant to these other questions, but I want to ask one more question, Sam. What would you do if you won the lottery tomorrow? Let us know in the chat. What would you do if you won the lottery tomorrow? How would your life change? I see travel, move to Fiji, buy my family a better house, start investing. Do you hear the values in these now? I'm hearing lots of values here. I would be terrified. Take care of a lot of people. I would still do the work I'm doing with my students. Amen, Marjorie. I'm with you. I'd be on fewer Zooms. If you see me do wiggle fingers, it means I feel you. No debt. Set up a foundation. Volunteer more, create a TV series. Neat. So what we're talking about, and I hate to kind of keep beating this drum, but we're talking about the thing that Andy set up, which is values. I didn't expect that he was going to definitely land on that. But one of the things that I'll sometimes say to students is like, when you think about your career, the thing you want to do or be, I don't think that's the goal, the be all end all. Just the way that I don't think college is the goal. I think of both of these as a means to an end. So sometimes students are like, I'm going through this process and it will end with college. But certainly if you've lived longer than that, you know that like college, life doesn't end at college. It's sort of like a stop along the way, right? And I think of this career, whatever career we're making up, this is going to be like V1, ends up being these stops along the way. And each of these is not, again, the end. They're sort of the means through which we experience and express our values. So one of the things, one exercise that I like to use to sort of go, well, how am I doing in terms of, is the way that I'm spending my time the way that I want to be spending my time? And it goes like this. So on a piece of paper, draw a circle. And inside this circle, I want you to create a pie chart. Now, you might want to not create the pie chart right away, but I want you to first list the different spheres of your life. And by spheres of your life, I mean, for example, I have family. I'm also listing friends. This is like how I spend my time, right? Work. I've also got me time, which these days just means pickleball. You might have different ones. Yours might include health, for example. Yours might include faith or spirituality or God. But right now I'm breaking mine up into family, friends, work, me. Are there others? Maybe. It's revelatory that I'm not putting health in here. I'm actually thinking of that as sort of, and then I'm going to add another category called life stuff, like brushing my teeth. And, oh, you know what I should add? I'm going to add life stuff / sleep. You can skip those. So I don't want to dictate these for you. Like, you should split them into these categories. Like, I want to kind of let you make a list of how would you determine these things. Next, once you've listed these, I want you to just, on a pie chart here, list, okay, well, if I've got 24 hours in a day, then how do I tend to spend? Actually, let's do it over a week. I tend to spend about 8 hours a night sleeping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 33% of my time is sleep. So I'm marking that out. How much time do I spend working? Well, I'm actually, I don't know, I'm actually a 9 to 5-er. That sometimes surprises people, but I've kind of come into that rhythm. So now I'm going to go 33% is work. The rest of it, I'm going to take a minute to think about, while I let you actually think about, how much time do I spend with friends? How much time do I spend with family? And go ahead and put it into this little chart, if you would. Humor me here. Let's spend a minute or minute and a half or so. And again, name the different spheres, ways you spend your time over a given week, because it's maybe different from day to day. And then fill it in with percentages. And it should add up to 100, hopefully. Let's spend a minute to do this. If you need to take out a calculator, feel free. And if you're like, I don't want to write this out, you can certainly type this out. Okay. So my version looks like this. It's got 33% work, 33% sleep. I've got 20% family, and I've got 8% friends and 6% me. Oh, I forgot to include life stuff. Whoops. I would probably go 15% family and 5% life stuff, which is like driving places, which I don't do all that much, and brushing my teeth, which I do sometimes. Okay, second chart. How would you like it to be? So this is sort of like current status. Second chart, this is how I would actually like it to be. So new circle, and I'll just do this on a separate piece of paper. And again, we'll only spend like a minute on this for the sake of time. You can certainly come back to this. Now, some of you may be listening to this and being like, yeah, that's how I want to be spending it. Good on you. What's your aspirational pie chart? How would you like to be spending your time? And we'll spend just a minute on this. And I'd love to just hear in the chat, because it's hard to share all these. I'd love to just see what is the, great question, Jennifer. I'll lob that one back to you. Jennifer's asking, what's the appropriate percent reduction in time spent working? I'm afraid 100% is desired, but never likely. Shrug emoji. What are y'all noticing as you do this exercise in terms of the difference between current iteration and aspirational version? And I'll share a couple of my noticings. I'm noticing as I do this that I would actually like to spend 5% less time working. It's not 30% less time. I really like working. I get a lot of my needs met through work. But I would want to reduce work by 5%. Friends, I'd like to move that over to friends. I'd like to have a little more me time. My sleep is I'm doing pretty okay on sleep. Rose wants to add other categories. Then add other categories, Rose, please feel free. Feel free. Yeah. Oh, that's probably in response to like, what are you noticing? More community and friends and less time working and less commuting. Now, here's what's interesting about this exercise is when you get it down to percentages, these actually can turn into action items, because I can actually go, okay, well, if my ideal life, my ideal self works, because sometimes I've done this and I'm like, I want to work 15%. I tried that life. It's not the life for me. I actually want to be working, 6 hours a day, 4 to 6 probably. This actually turns into, okay, well, what would I have to do in my life, even in this year, to work 5% less? Because that's actually an achievable thing, probably. For many, I'm not saying for everyone, and not certainly instantly, but it's probably achievable in this lifetime to work a little bit less if you focus on it and turn it into a plan. So anyway, this can turn into like actual action steps. I want to offer you, and this is going to be sort of like the faster part of the session, but I want to shift into like some, because I said I would in the bullet points, some productivity tools that I've found to be really useful. And I think these are useful for students, parents, and counselors. So one of the first ones that I found, and I mentioned this one briefly, is this to-do list. And this to-do list, it's a very simple to-do list. I find that the tools that I end up using again and again end up being the simplest ones. Those are the ones that stay. So here's essentially how I separate my action items. So I have 3 categories. I have today, the stuff that I'm going to work on literally today. I have this week, and I have horizon. Oftentimes the horizon stuff admittedly just doesn't get done. But if I can just split them into these 3 categories, I find that to be incredibly useful. And also, I'm somebody who experiences anxiety around work sometimes, but when I do this, it will reduce my anxiety because I go, you know what? I'm just not going to get to that today. Am I going to get to that this week? Maybe. And if I know that I need some more time, it's just something that I want to think about, I'll put it on the horizon that actually relieves some stress. So simple recommendation. Shout out to Celine Santiago for introducing me to this. I still use it. I used it today. Today, this week, horizon. Those 3 categories are the only categories I need when I'm creating a to-do list. The second resource that's been very useful to me, and I think there's like a free version and a paid version, is Loom. Loom is a very simple way, and he's laughing because we send Looms back and forth to each other each week. Um, I, we have, well, we'll get into the details in just a second, but Loom is a free, simple, let me just see if I can flash up the screen real quick. I've got all these names of people that I've sent Looms to, and I haven't like told them I'm going to be sharing my screen. So I'm not going to share like my personal Looms that I've been sending, but let me tell you what they're useful for. If you just type in loom.com, you'll see the website. But essentially, Loom is a thing that installs at the top of your browser, and it's basically like a little camera that records your face or records your screen. You hit record and you talk. Now, my recommendation is to keep your Looms short because it's no kind of gift to send somebody hey, there's this quick 15-minute video that you could just maybe watch later today. But what I'm trying to communicate to students about, for example, what I think about their essay topic, or what I think about how their whole application is coming together, or I'm trying to communicate to someone on my team some really something that's sensitive, and a conversation that we have that feels more than an email. I find that it's more personal, and tone can be communicated so much more with much more nuance. I've also found, students, when you're cold emailing somebody, if somebody, don't do this, but if somebody cold emailed me and was just email, I can much more quickly, but if somebody says, hey, here's this 30-second video that I recorded for you, I'm going to click on that because I'm going to be kind of curious. And so when I found this to be useful, when I'm just cold emailing people, asking them something, even if I've never met them before. So there are tons of uses I found for that. I'm not getting paid by Loom to promote them, but I found it to save me a ton of time. And hopefully create a little bit more connection on our team.
Something there?
Please go, jump in.
Yeah, like one reason that we found it useful for our team, we've stolen / borrowed. The company WordPress has an intercompany policy for communication that they call API, not the actual protocols, but they refer to it as assume positive intent in internal communication, just because it seems like we're pretty well programmed as a species to think about like, let me look for where somebody thinks I'm bad or doing it wrong. It's easy to read into the negative versions. So it's useful to assume positive intent in everything regardless, because I think 99 point something of the time it's there. But Loom especially seems useful because it actually captures the fact that you're not criticizing them or angry or upset or anything, which seems like it helps with team and cohesion and all kinds of things, especially with things around writing that can feel so personal.
Thank you. That's a great call out, or call in, I should say. The next one I'm putting in the chat, this is an article by Tony Stubblebine. I think it's Stubblebine, it might be Stubblebine. He's the CEO of a company called Coach.me, just incidentally. Actually, no, he's no longer the CEO, he's the founder, but someone else took that over. But this article, How to Configure Your Cell Phone for Productivity and Focus, has something like, let me just scroll down and see. I don't know if there was, I don't know exactly how many suggestions it has, but it's a couple dozen suggestions that have changed my relationship to this thing that I spend a lot of time on, but I started spending a lot less time on once I read this. So it's things like, how do you simplify your home screen? And how do you turn off, for example, all the notifications? I mean, that's sort of like an obvious thing maybe that you've already done, but there's so many beautiful practical suggestions in here, like disabling your default web browser, that things that I might not have thought to do, that when I worked through the suggestions, and heads up, it's going to take 45 minutes maybe to work through. You don't have to do all the suggestions, but to get through all these. But that to me was a way that I like captured back a lot of time. And I ended up deleting some apps that were eating up a lot of my time based on that. One more that I just want to give a shout out to is there's a nice article that was written by Paul Graham on maker schedule versus manager schedule. One of the things that I referenced on a counselor webinar, I think it was earlier this week, was this notion of deep work. Deep Work is a book by Cal Newport. And it's the idea that when we're working on things that are creative things and we need focused time, having 2 to 3 hours, it's different for different people, can really be a difference maker. Some of you, I'm already preaching to the choir, you know what I'm talking about, but I'm sharing in the chat this article, manager time versus maker time. And what that's led me to do, and I have this luxury because I have flexibility with my time, is to carve out when I'm doing a creative thing to be like, shut off all the things. I need 3 hours to focus on this. And I need that as a writer. And then to also recognize, to build a little more, in Spanish, they say concientización, like conscientiousness, awareness of when I actually may not be realizing it instantly, but realize I'm actually in manager schedule. So yesterday, for example, I thought I was going to have maker time, 3 hours. I needed to be manager time, and I needed to like just get back on emails and move things forward. So manager versus maker, I found that the distinction to be really useful for my own productivity and for the way that I think about my time. Andy, I want to kick it to you for a minute to talk a little bit about savoring. So this is an interesting concept. Actually, I don't know if you want to talk about savor. Actually, you know what? Let me share what I mean by savoring, my example, and then I'll let you say whatever you want to say about it. So when I think about savoring life, I'm thinking about the thing that Andy was saying earlier about how oftentimes we're getting messages sent to us that we do not have and lack. And if you have just this thing, then you will be happy, whether it's a Bud Light or, I don't know, better abs or something. And what I think about when I think of savoring is simple appreciation for what I have and slowing down. So one of my favorite ways of doing this is my friend Greg, who Andy happens to know, and I will sometimes take gratitude walks. And oh wow, I'm just realizing another exercise that I might talk about in the Q&A. But this exercise is basically literally going on a walk beside each other, and we'll just go back and forth with something that we're grateful for. And we've done it with gratitudes, and one of us will take 10 seconds or 30 seconds, and then the other will go. And we've also done it with the phrase, what am I present to right now? And I think both of those question stems, what am I present to or what am I grateful for, really help me savor. And also help build connection in my relationship with my friend Greg. Andy, how do you savor life? What do you suggest?
I'll try to do two really fast because I think they're both useful. One super short one that I think for developing the skill relates to, I had a teacher in, I think it was junior high. I remember somebody in class saying that they were bored. And the teacher, I remember saying like, only boring people get bored. And we were kind of shocked. But then I after thinking about it, I realized like, oh, yes, in the sense that like, if I'm ever bored, it's that I'm not looking closely and noticing that every single moment there is something that I can just experience, observe, sink into. And a friend of ours has an exercise that they call notice something new, where one way to play with it is literally just like pick up something, especially pick up something you're super familiar with. Like if you drink coffee out of a specific coffee mug every day, grab that mug and just tap your leg every time you actually notice something new about it. And you'll be tapping your leg crazy fast as far as you start to notice. It's like, oh, there are so many things. But to my mind, it's an especially beautiful way to build the capacity for just noticing in any given moment how rich experience is. That it's easy for our minds to feel like, oh, I've seen this before. Like it's built to think, I've seen this before, we've done this before, it's familiar. And that disguises that that's not actually ever true in a certain sense. And another one that I think is really useful is the Stoics had a meditation that they called the last time meditation, where anytime, especially if you're doing something that can feel heavy or onerous in some way. So for example, like one that I've heard somebody use before is, if you were, carrying your young child up the stairs to put them to bed, and it was you were tired from the day, your back was hurting, all kinds of things. And you're like, oh God, this is not what I want to be doing right now. Just flipping that and noticing like, oh, there will be a last time that I get to do this. Like there will be a last time that I can actually lift unless you're an amazingly strong human, there will be a last time that I can lift up this kid and carry them to bed. And it's a way that I can, with almost everything in life, I can flip almost instantly into just gratitude for a moment of like, oh, I get to have this thing. Even with something like, like there will be a last time in my life that I do the dishes. And in a way, like I'll miss aspects of that. I'll miss the ritual of it. I'll miss all kinds of things with it. But that I think that those are ways to kind of tap into a shift in frame and a savoring that I think are beautiful and valuable.
Thank you. I love both of those. I'm thinking of a poem that we read together recently about the last time, about tucking a daughter into bed. I'm going to share in the chat. There's a list that we have from this website that I mentioned, positivepsychology.com, on savoring, and it's got 21 different exercises for savoring. So if you're interested in that, you'll see that link, and we'll again follow up with all the links via the afterwards. I want to share with you all some resources that we have. Some I mentioned on yesterday's session, but I want to just walk you through. And I'm going to do a boring thing and like show you where they are on the website. And I know that sounds kind of basic, but then we're going to have some time for Q&A. So if you've got questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, or even feedback on stuff that we've been talking about, or even if you want to just be like, yes to that, or no, I disagree with that, or what do you think about that? We welcome it all. So on the website, this is a webinar for mostly 9th, 10th, 11th graders. So I'm going to click this part. And if you don't have some kind of timeline and sort of like, I don't know if you like print things out or if anybody even has a printer, there's that meme that's like, I got $1 billion idea. How about a printer that works every time, whenever I wanted to? But if you are the kind of person to print something out, or this college admissions timeline pretty well walks you through all the things to be thinking about as you go through this process. So I recommend it. It's like beautifully designed too. I think Alex on our team put that together, with stuff on thinking about majors and visit tips. So you can kind of center as you're thinking about this whole college process, like how can I be organizing my time and energy? Some of the things we're known for, 3 of the things: free resources, video courses, and one-on-one stuff. So in the free resource land, we have this epic college application hub that's sort of like, I would say if I was going through this process, or if my kid was, I'd be like, bookmark that one, because that's got a lot of things. From guides to where to apply to college, to how to figure out what you want to apply to college, to how do you plan your summer, something we talked a little bit about last night, to brainstorming exercises for essays. And then I spent a lot of time a few years ago recording episodes for a podcast. The podcast is coming back, by the way, in case anybody's curious. I think I'm going to have some guest folks, so we get some more voices hosting, but there's some really cool episodes on a range of things related to college admissions and also life. And then our YouTube channel, I spent a lot of time last year recording a bunch of videos on that, which has got, and a lot of our past sessions end up there as well. In terms of our video and live courses, we have some individual courses that we lead each year, like how to build a balanced college list, how to make college affordable, and how to build a self-directed project. So these are courses that we led last year that are available on demand. And our courses are pay what you can, which means we don't want there to be a financial barrier for folks to joining. But one of the things we launched this year, in fact, this morning, is our college admissions pass. And essentially what this is it bundles all of the courses, and it works alongside a community so that students have, beyond the sort of like the DIY approach, this is sort of like, hey, you're going to get emails regularly with, here are the things to be working on when the time that you should be, and I say should be, focusing on based on whatever your grade level is. So some of the things, let me just scroll down to some of the different workshops that we're going to be offering. In February, for example, we've got setting goals and intentions for the year. So that's going to be one of our very first sessions. It's going to happen in a couple of weeks. And you're going to have an opportunity to really think about, okay, what is this process going to mean? What is it going to look like for you? And this is for students and parents, because we want parents to be involved. And we also want to be talking about which parts should parents be involved in and which parts is, let the student drive. We're going to talk about picking your high school courses and planning extracurriculars. I think sometimes students get misguided and they start to think about extracurriculars in terms of what colleges want. And we, as you can tell already, are big on coming back to values and thinking about, well, what is it that a student, what's really driving you? Because that's what's going to get you motivated around your extracurriculars. And then there's more. We talked a little bit last night about the summer, but we're going to dive a little bit more deeply in terms of thinking about what are those opportunities. We're going to have guest speakers come in and talk about, if you're interested, for example, in internships or research, how do you even get those? And how much do colleges, care if that's something that's important for you to sort of drop in, and in what situations, do colleges care? Resource on how to develop a great college list. Like I said, how to pay for college. We're going to offer for the first time ever. This is not something that we've promoted yet, but we have gotten lots of people asking for us for more resources on highly selective schools. So we are going to offer a mini course with Tom, who some of you met last night, on applying to highly selectives. Counselors, if you're watching, we're also going to do a counselor version for helping students apply to highly selectives, because it's something that we've spent a lot of time doing and thinking about. And Tom himself has a lot of expertise in what exactly, highly selective schools are looking for. We're going to talk about major exploration, creating a standardized testing plan, how to make the most of college visits when it comes to that. And then for students who are in 11th grade, we'll segue into, okay, now it's time, now that the school year is over, to start thinking about our essays. So you'll spend 4 weeks with me working on your personal statements, writing those inside of a class. We've got, we pair you up with a writing partner so you can kind of keep each other accountable. And then we get into the application and supplemental essays, which is like the other parts of your application. For students who are interested, we've got an advanced personal statement course. And essentially that walks you through, hey, if you want to take things to the next level, here's how to do it. Or if you felt like this stuff was too basic and you're like, hey, I want to do something that's really going to, be interesting or unusual, then this course is for you. Some students are applying to the University of California schools, so we've got a particular mini course on that. And then we've got drop-in sessions where students can be asking questions about applications. Once, sort of September, October, November, December rolls around, we're gonna kind of leave that space open a little bit and ask and survey you, our community, to be like, hey, what sessions do you want? So these sessions will be hosted on a combination of like Zoom sessions. We've also got communities. We've got a Discord community for students. We've got a separate parent community that's not included as a part of this cost, but it's pretty low cost, and it's also pay what you can. So we invite you to come and spend the year with us. You'll see more of this in your email. So I won't belabor it. And then what else? And then we do one-on-one help. So for some students, they want a little more one-on-one support. We do that. We'll email you with more info on that. So those are the PSAs. That's the commercial done. Let's see what's happening in the chat. Let's hang out for a few minutes. You had mentioned affirmative action, Supreme Court plus ChatGPT. Oh, you're just going to throw that here, Lisa, in at the end here? Let's just dig into those real quick. So, oh yes, that's right. Thank you. I did mention that yesterday, that I would talk more about this today. So let's start with ChatGPT, shall we, Andy? This is going to take us on a particular tangent, and this might eat up the rest of our Q&A, but I think it's a fascinating topic and well worth the time. Let's do this. I'm going to, because I think this could easily eat up 5 or 10 minutes. Here, let's talk ChatGPT. Let's just jump in and see what happens. Andy, for folks who aren't, yeah, go.
Before we do real fast, do you want, because Danielle also asked something about trends that you
yes.
I don't know if those are similar, but do you want to do that?
Yes. Thank you. Sorry, Danielle. And thank you for keeping me accountable, because that is the thing that I said I would talk more in depth. Okay, they're related. So 3 ways that I think the college admission process is going to change. Number one, I think that we need to be talking about the AI in the room, the artificial intelligence in the room. So I think that OpenAI and ChatGPT are going to have an impact. They're having an impact already on the ways that students write and the ways that, the assignments that schools are giving. So I think that colleges will have to adapt. How will they adapt? Shrug emoji. We kind of have to see. I think they're going to be more reactive than proactive, because I think they're going to kind of wait and see what are they hearing, like what's happening. But I think it's going to be hard in some cases for them to be able to tell the difference especially once this thing comes out with ChatGPT 4, which is like the better version. Andy will explain more in just a second of the current artificial intelligence. And so the prediction that I make is that I think that what colleges will do is, I think essays could change. I think the personal statement prompts could potentially change, because they might be asking for different things. And I think there could come a time where they go, you know what, personal statements, we want to actually do timed writing assignments instead. I think that could happen sooner rather than later, potentially. The second thing, a big change that I could see coming, is this Supreme Court decision on affirmative action. If this comes down the way that many folks think it will, affirmative action is going to be struck down, which will mean that colleges are not able to ask about students' race and consider students' race in admissions. And so I think that, again, Ethan's foggy crystal ball, I think colleges, a couple things are going to happen. I think they're going to maybe shift recruiting strategies a little bit, because I think that colleges are interested, many are interested in having a diverse community, but if they're not able to ask about it, well, how do we find students so that, from a wide range of backgrounds? So I think that they'll shift recruiting strategies. And I actually think, as it relates to our work, I think that supplemental essay prompts may change. And you might see more schools asking particularly about diversity and about what that means to a particular student and what their experiences with diversity in the broad sense have been. So I could see that shifting a lot. In terms of tests optional, and I'm interested in, this is not much of a conversation. This is more seeing me like, here's what Ethan thinks, but I'd love to hear what, especially counselors, what you think about test optional. Do you think there will be more testing, less testing, or about the same testing? My prediction is sort of like about the same testing. I think there's definitely a trend towards test optional. And more schools going test blind or test optional. I don't see that shifting. Personally, I think that colleges will continue, certain colleges will continue to drop. There will be certain that are like, hey, we definitely have to keep tests, which is a whole separate webinar on why. But I see that sort of continuing to kind of trend like this. And I could get into a lot more about why, but I'm trying to do the fast version of these. Michael thinks that test optional will continue. And let me just, so that I don't hog the mic totally, I have been a little bit. Andy, thoughts on ChatGPT? Whatever you feel like saying about it. I'm just curious. I'd love to hear you share about it.
Yeah, we've had a lot of internal discussions, and we also had a long talk with a bunch of colleagues earlier this week on it. I think it's a lot of the stuff that I've read and thought about that I think is most useful is in terms of long-term ways that we can partner with it. And by we, I mean like society as a whole, but especially the entire education system. I think there are really interesting potentials for building things like personalized learning systems on top of this thing. There are things that it's really good at and things that it will, because of the way it's built, it will probably never be good at. Like it won't be good at computation because it doesn't know or understand what it's doing. It's just putting words in order probabilistically. But I think the way that it impacts college admissions stuff, yeah, like, like Ethan was saying, I think college essays are virtually guaranteed to exist this year. Next year, it seems highly likely just because institutional inertia and all kinds of reasons. But yeah, I could see like in many years, maybe there is a shift away, or maybe there is an attempt to change how we do things. Because it is really good at certain kinds of writing. It's not great at the kind of writing that ultimately a lot of college admissions officers would want yet, at least. The yet feels really complex though. And that's one where it's like we'll see how this continues to evolve. Basically, like ChatGPT is GPT version like 3.5. GPT-4 will have like 500 times the parameters. So it's going to get better at this game that it plays in really interesting ways. Yeah, I feel both very sad and in part frustrated on the behalf of high school teachers and professors who just kind of are thrown into the chop and suddenly have to deal with this. And it does seem like there is amazing potential for building systems that possibly do things like increase equity. I wrote a bunch this week on it, and we'll be posting something sometime in the near future on different ways that we see this. But yeah, it feels like there's a range of possibilities in terms of how this impacts admissions and application stuff that'll continue unfolding over the next couple of years.
Yeah, Jennifer's making a great point that when elite colleges receive 50 to 70,000 applications a year, there's got to be some way for the system to adjust. Yeah, I mean, and in some cases, I could see that this would increase the number of applications because students are like, well, essays are easier to write. I mean, certainly there are ethical concerns that we're not even really talking about, maybe too obvious, but I think that applications could increase. It could be harder, even, the getting in could be even tougher. And so, I could see some folks feeling like, well, quote unquote, everybody else is using it. I also think it's gonna be interesting to see what are you reading, Andy, about how long this thing's gonna be free? Like, what's your foggy crystal ball sense? Is like, how long will ChatGPT be free, or do you think they gate it real quick?
I think ChatGPT itself, that varies a little bit. I mean, it seems like what's likely is either that one version, and my brother-in-law works in machine learning at Google, And he said that Google is actually, like, a lot of people are fairly scared because this thing kind of does search in a better way. Like, again, it can be factually wrong, but so can the internet, and people often don't check. So like, they're thinking like, does this change how a lot of the internet itself functions? Like, do you go to Google anymore if you can just ask an AI like, hey, tell me about this thing? If they head in that direction, and if OpenAI like tries to monetize this by in essence making a search tool out of it, then I think it stays free. In the sense of that, like, Gmail and everything are free because we are the products, like our data. So in that sense, I can see it staying free. But with GPT-3, the iteration before this, there are a lot of companies that built software on top of it and licensed it. And I think that will probably continue as well, that there will be ways. And so one thing I'm curious about, and in a way hopeful for at least, like, again, I don't, we haven't been great at this as a society, but it feels like there could be great ways to do things like build equity across our system by doing things like I could see people raising VC money and building software that builds essentially like really cheap personalized tutoring systems on top of it that will be imperfect, but there could be really interesting personalized learning opportunities in ways that really change how our system works, in ways that I think are incredibly valuable and important there. I saw somebody mention the detectors. I've beaten every detector so far with about 20 seconds worth of work.
Quick side, hold on, quick context. Andy, how much time have you spent thinking about ChatGPT over the last month since it was released? If you had to guess, like, if you had to guess, how many hours would you say?
I don't know, dozens since
okay,
November.
Cool. I just wanted to give folks that context.
Walking on the beach, thinking, yeah, that like the problem with the detectors in essence is that they look for the perplexity of the language. In essence, like, how predictable is it? So if all you do is you go in and you change some phrasing around, you start beating detectors really quickly. So unless students change nothing, detectors will tend to fail. And even then they can never know for sure. It's just like, I grabbed a paragraph in USA Today and pasted it into a detector, and it was 75% sure that a human wrote it, which is kind of good, but also doesn't give me a lot of faith that there won't be a lot of false positives. Just because, like, in essence, all it's detecting is like, is the writing simple, or is it a little complex and surprising in certain ways? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't rely on those.
Yeah, it's kind of a Wild West moment where we're all kind of like, what is this thing? What can it do? It reminds me, Andy and my friend Ryan and I, we sat up the other night, not just hanging out talking, but like talking about ChatGPT and like putting up on the screen and like typing things in and like reading the responses. And it's like, you know, I think ostensibly students could be like, hey, I want this to write my college essay for me. But, you know, it sort of depends on what you plug into it in terms of the quality of the thing that you get back. But I think that there will, at least, this is my prediction, another like foggy crystal ball prediction, is that on the Common App this year, there will appear a thing where you have to check a box that says, you have to certify that you did not have use artificial intelligence to write your essay. And it'll be interesting how they phrase that, because I think some students might be like, well, what did you mean? What do you mean write it? You know? So I think that could very well pop up. Lisa's saying, this is so complicated. Timed writing alternatives seem more fair on one level, but doesn't factor in the fact that some kids write great essays after a lot of iterative work. I know. I mean, Imagine what we're thinking, Lisa, we who love using this as like a reflective time for students and thinking about, for me, the college essay. Andy said something really nice the other week about the college essay isn't necessarily the thing itself. It's like an interesting byproduct of this cool process that students have gone through. So we're like, you know, internally and externally now, you know, bemoaning sort of like, oh no, is this going to go away? I hope not. I hope that students will still engage in writing as a means of self-reflection and growth and discovery. And, you know, to use a different use of the word wayfinding, you know, finding their way in the world. I don't know who said this, but it's like, when I write, I learn how I think. And so just, you know, maybe that's like cliche for colleges. I got to say that, but that's what I'm That's what I think could be at stake here, or at least not that it will completely die, but I think could ultimately shift. And I think that I'm sort of on the, not on the fence, but I'm on the side. You can kind of hear like a little bit of, you can see Andy and I both smiling a little bit. I think it's sort of like this mixture for me of like optimism, like I could see there being cool potentials, and like a little bit of like fear of like just the unknown, like what could this mean? But ultimately, like there is some excitement for me around this about how this could help us, you know, be more creative and find interesting new possibilities. What else folks are saying? Students have been using Google to solve math and calculus problems, so essays are just the next step. We'll see. I mean, we're going to find out together is what's going to happen, I think. Lisa says, my son, who's a senior, worked with CEG for the last year. Oh, thanks, a testimonial. It was a game changer. So you're sweet, Lisa, to give us a shout out here. Happy, though, that SATs are currently optional. Perhaps there's a way to use CGBT for good. Yeah. Something Andrew said, simple with surprises. There a methodology of how these colleges are supposed to be written. College essays are supposed to be written. I mean, that's a great, go ahead, Andy, go.
No, go for it.
No, you go. Did you have a response to that?
More that like, in a way, right now at least, like what the AIs are not good at is building an essay that has something more like voice and personality and complex perspective. And I'm wary of like a supposed to, because I think I think what's fun about this work is helping students really dig in and explore and understand, and that then they totally surprise me with where they go with writing. So I'm wary of saying something like how they are supposed to be written, because I think a lot of my favorite essays that we've seen students produce are vastly different in terms of structure, content, voice. The simple with surprises part more is that when humans write, we will have little turns of phrase that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Whereas the way these large language models work is that they're generally just going with mostly what is the word you would expect to follow this. Like one way that I've done before is if I say, you know, think of the word that pops in your head when I say this. If I say the ball rolled down the, I'm betting 90+% of you thought hill. And that like all ChatGPT is doing is in a certain way. It has read like a third of the internet and built a massive map of relationships between words and probabilities. And when it's producing text, it's just following rough probabilities. And it sometimes has some variety in there, but it's pretty simple with the way that it produces language. Whereas when a human writes, like, you know, if I asked you all to write a paragraph on something, you would have little turns of phrase or little pairings of words that we would have a moment of like, oh, the more technical terms that like you would have high, or at least some pieces with high perplexity, where we're just like, oh, that's not the phrasing I expected there. Like one that comes to mind as far as like high perplexity goes, there's a linguist named George Lakoff who has a bunch of cool work, but he talks about how that as a sentence, like sit in the apple juice seat without context doesn't make sense, but that there was an instance in which this made perfect sense because he was staying at a bed and breakfast, and the day before there had been apple juice in front of one of the seats. ChatGPT would virtually never come up with a phrase like sit in the apple juice seat because it would be absurd. But one of y'all might actually use that as a phrase for describing a thing. And that would have really high perplexity. So right now, it's not good at, like it's pretty simple and formulaic, but it'll be fascinating to see how it grows and changes and how what we use writing for grows and changes.
Yeah, I mean, the things that, like, in some ways, I'm not worried in terms of like like Alana asked a great question. Is it safe to assume colleges are looking for unique and self-focused insight essays? Yeah, like the 4 qualities to me of a great personal statement still hold true. Like, I think colleges are interested in understanding students' core values, which I think come out of a process and, you know, are reflected in an application in several different ways. But I think that that's hard to replicate, you know, in some cases with specific examples. I think that, you know, vulnerability, it's hard for a machine to be vulnerable. I guess a machine could fake vulnerability, but that's hard to do. Craft, now that's something that I think with the right promptings, it could be in some cases well crafted. But then one of the things that I think is really tough is insight, the thing that you're talking about. It's answers that are uncommon to those so what questions. Are we becoming Luddites? Or are we reasonably terrified? Yeah, who knows? Again, shrug emoji. So I think that this is still the very beginning of this thing, and who knows? But for the most part, I still feel like this year, as I think about the next 9 months or so of this process, as students are starting to think about college and stuff, I think largely, I don't know. I mean, we'll see what what comes out, and how high schools and how colleges respond. I think mostly this year it's going to feel pretty similar to years past in terms of how students work through this process. So anyway, we've talked long enough. We want to thank you for being here, and thank you, Andy, for joining. And it feels weird because Andy and I are such close friends and like so connected to like thank him but thank you. And we're glad to have spent this time with you. Thanks for hanging on with us till the hopefully not too bitter end. And come hang out with us more. We've got more sessions that are coming up. Like I said, the next one is probably going to be the goal setting one. Yeah, we welcome you to join any of the communities we've got, and we'll follow up with all the resources. So much love. Thanks for hanging out with us and participating in the chat. It's been wonderful. All right.
Thanks, y'all.
Good night. Bye.
Good to see you.